Hey everybody, I'm NetherYam and welcome to a quick behind the scenes video of how I made my latest Lego animation on TikTok. This isn't going to be a full tutorial or an exhaustive look at my process, but just a little peek behind the scenes to see how I go from an idea to a final animation. I hope you enjoy. So we're going to get started with the usual office set that I've been using in the last few of my videos, and I'm just going to make a couple of changes so that it works better for this particular shot. I knew I wanted the camera to be looking down this direction, so I'm just hiding a couple of things like the wall and the couch so that the camera can just see down that. I can have the camera kind of as far or as close as I need to without anything getting in the way. I'm then going to load in the Impala model that I made so that I can start getting that into place because that's the first thing that I'm going to animate. So once that's in place, I'm just going to move the car into a good starting position. I haven't totally nailed down the animation in my mind just yet. I just know I want it to come in from the right and break through the wall. That's about as far as I've gotten at this point. So I'm just going to make sure that it's at the right level, at floor level, and then I'm just going to get it out to the right-hand side into a good starting position. Now, once the car is at least close to where I believe it's going to start and end, I'm going to start laying down what are called keyframes into the timeline editor there. So down on the bottom of the screen, you can see me place down these little orange dots that are keyframes that tell the computer where the car should be at any given moment in time or any frame. And then the computer normally will interpolate, and you can actually see that happening as it plays between those two keyframes, that the computer will interpolate the position of the car in between those two locations. But that's not entirely how I'm going to animate this particular video, and in fact most of my Lego videos I like to have a little bit of that stop motion feel, so I don't really want the computer to do a whole lot of interpolation for various things. In this particular instance, I want the car to feel a little more rough, a little bit more handmade or hand animated, which probably isn't super necessary for this particular shot, but I like to make sure that I know exactly where the car will be at every frame so that I know that the audience is going to see it in exactly the locations that I want them to see it in, instead of letting the computer make that decision. Now, you have a lot of control over how the computer interpolates between keyframes, so normally it's not a huge issue, but for little quick animations where you only have a couple of frames to work with anyway, I like to make sure that I am in control of where my subject matter ends up directly, and it also gives you a little bit of that kind of almost messiness that I'm looking for in the stop motion feel. So here you can see that I actually do start using a little bit of that computer interpolation to get the car to sort of smoothly roll back down after it runs into the far wall. And that's just because I believe that that is the right tool for this particular circumstance. So you really just want to use whatever works best for the kind of motion that you're looking for. So we're speeding up here and skipping ahead just a little bit. I already have the door and the door frame animated, and I now have the camera lined up where it's going to be for the final shot, so you can see the shot progressing over on the left-hand side of the screen. So I just wanted to illustrate how I was animating each piece as it came out of the wall as the car passed through it. Now, I'm animating these pieces by hand, and that's not necessarily the best or most accurate way to do this. This is something that I sort of enjoy doing, just to, again, make it a little bit more stop motion feeling or a little bit hand animated. But there are definitely better ways of doing this type of animation that doesn't involve animating each and every piece by hand. If you go back into my TikToks, the Falling Hearts video, those hearts were not animated by hand. That it starts to get impossible when you're dealing with hundreds, thousands, or even sometimes on big movies, millions of pieces that all have to fall and bounce off of each other. So you would usually use what are called dynamics or rigid body dynamics for simulations of that sort. And if I really wanted to do something like this, or if I wanted to do something like this on a much larger scale, I would figure out a dynamic solution for that where the computer would actually figure out how every piece should be falling based on some sort of physical calculation. But because I was only dealing with a couple of pieces and I wanted it to look a little bit hand animated, I went and did it manually. But if you're just getting started with animation, this probably isn't something you are going to need to know as an animator. You might end up in a situation where somebody wants you to animate something in this type of style, but there are often better ways to do it, so probably not. But now I'm just going to animate the rest of these wall pieces super fast, so enjoy, and I'll come back when there's something interesting to talk about. Okay, real quick, here's something that's super important for animating in computers is that you can parent one object to another. So after I animated that blue piece, I was able to just pin that white flat piece to it so that it just followed along. I made a couple of modifications to the animation to get that white piece out of the way, and then I was able to just go in and make a few changes to that white piece to make it look like it was kind of separating from the blue piece, and then that white piece was all done. I didn't have to do any more animation on it. The next thing I want to talk briefly about is the graph editor. I mentioned earlier that you can have a bit of control over how the computer interpolates between two frames. And while you can make sort of major time changes in that dope sheet where you can see the little orange dots as keyframes, this graph editor is where you can really make some sort of higher level changes in how your pieces move or how your animations move in between the keyframes that you set. And so you can see that as I change these curves so that I can change the way that the computer interpolates between one frame and the next. So in a graph like this, up and down is the value or how much your model is moving or rotating, and then left and right is time. So as you create sharper drop-offs or S-shaped curves, you can really define how the computer is going to move your model through space, and it's really important for making things feel like they have weight and impact. And like this piece on the roof, I really wanted it to sort of rotate over and then really look like it falls and stops, like it has weight and it really is running into the top of the car, even though in computer animation models don't really have any weight or collision inherently. Just like you may have seen at the beginning of the video, when I started to animate the car, I could just move it right through the wall. Okay, let's talk about characters and character rigs. So in computer animation, you have what's called a character rig that's a little bit like a puppet for your character. You can see that I'm animating this little minifigure using all of these little colored lines that don't end up getting rendered in the final animation, but allow me to control the character and control sections of the character independently, individually, and the whole character will move along as a single package. And as before, I will move the character one piece at a time, setting keyframes and either allowing the computer to interpolate between those keyframes or setting them one frame at a time and forcing the character into the animation that I want. In the case of these Lego animations, I tend to do a lot of single frame animations, but there's plenty of interpolation style animation as well. So this method of animating using a character rig is also how I'll animate the faces of the minifigs later. So let's go ahead and get into one final time lapse. We'll get the Winchester brothers into their car. We'll parent them to the car so I don't have to move them through the scene anymore. They'll just be attached to the car. And then we'll go ahead and animate their faces and get into final editing. Enjoy! Okay, so now I'm just going to do a quick test render. It's a much faster version of rendering. You can see that it doesn't look nearly as realistic, but it's significantly faster. I can then get all of those images into After Effects and do just a rough cut so that I can make sure that it's working with the sound and the timing is the way that I want to. Once I render the final images, they will replace those old temporary images, and I can just watch that animation finish, watch the render finish in After Effects as I go. So now it's pretty much just time to start final rendering. So just for fun, I'm going to put a little timer on the screen so that you can watch how long it took for this first frame of animation to render in real time. So now that that's done, we'll go ahead and reload that footage in After Effects, and you can see the first frame of that animation is now the final render. So all that's left to do is wait for several hours for the render to finish, and we have our final video. Hey everybody, thank you so much for watching this video. If you have any questions at all about the process or animation, please don't hesitate to leave a comment down below. I will try to respond to as many of them as I can. If you're interested in getting into animation or specifically animating Legos, you can find links to all the plugins and rigs that I use and to Blender, which is a free program, down in the description. If you're interested in seeing more animation or tutorial videos from me, please consider subscribing. And finally, if you want to help support me so I can make more animation videos like this more often, please consider visiting my Patreon page. Okay, bye.